Okay, it turns out when I talk about unlimited 4K HQ recording on the Canon R5, you guys have a lot of questions. Let's spend a little bit of time going over what you asked me and some updates to unlimited recording in 4K HQ and 8K on the Canon R5. So I recently was doing camera tests on the Canon R5 and discovered a way to get unlimited 4K HQ and potential 8K video on the Canon R5. And I'll be honest, I posted that video and the response y'all gave me was it was awesome. Thank you so much for everyone that commented and watched that video. I really appreciated it. And your response was great. And I got so many incredible questions out there. And I really did try and answer as many of you as I could in the comment section on that previous video. But there were so many great questions and points that were raised in that video that I felt I actually needed to make a follow-up video just to kind of make sure that I answered everybody's questions. And some of you brought up some really cool points that I just could not ignore and had to go test out myself. So we're gonna go and look at that today. The first thing I wanna do is I do wanna bring up an update for the photographers out there. Now, last week I did do a video about how if you get the overheat warning in photo only mode on the Canon R5, how to fix it. And it really comes down to the custom mode video settings on your video side of the camera. Please watch the video here. It'll answer all your questions about that. However, someone did bring up a great update that I want to put here in this video first off. You don't have to remove apparently all of your custom settings on your video, just C3. So if you clear out custom mode 3, apparently you can still keep custom mode 1 and 2 on your video modes in Canon R5, and the photography will not give you that annoying overheat blinking warning. I just want to update that in case you all are wondering about the photographer side. So let's go and dive now into the video side of the Canon R5, which I think most of you are here about. And I want to start right off the bat about 8K video. Now, when I did do this video, I shot it in 8K RAW, and I was able to get over 3 hours of recording in 8K RAW from my camera. And I was blown away by this. And at the time, I had thought that Canon was giving you an 8K signal from that. And here is where we are now with the Canon updates and updates from Athens. If you get an Athens Ninja 5 Plus, that will be capable of recording 8K video from the HDMI 2 output of your Canon R5. Both Athens and Canon have confirmed this. The kicker is this: it's going to require a firmware update that's supposed to come out this fall. So I do believe once that firmware update comes out, I would love to hear from you out there that have a Ninja V Plus. Maybe I'll get one by that point. I'm not quite sure. But because the HDMI 2 is outputting the same signal, I do believe that you will be able to get the 8K 3-hour plus recording on the R5 if you use this hack. But we're not going to know that completely for sure until the fall when the firmware from Canon comes out for the Athens Ninja V Plus. So just a little piece of information for those of you that are asking, that is important to know. Now let's talk about another question I've gotten a ton of, and a lot of you, I did this test on the Canon R5, so many of you were asking me, Bryan, is this possible on a Canon R6? And my honest answer is this: I do not own a Canon R6, but the Canon R6 and the Canon R5 are so similar in their build that just as a speculative answer, I would say yes, this would probably work. I would love to see any of my R6 users out there to try that. Basically, if you have an R6, export your signal out through HDMI, make sure your EVF and LCD cut off very quickly, like in 1 minute to 3 minutes, and let me know what you got. I would love to know. But I'm not 100% certain if this would work on an R6. That being said, logic would tell me that if it works on the R5, it should work on the R6. So, guys out there with R6, good luck. Would love to hear what you discover. Okay, another question that came up over and over again, and even though I did include this as a small thumbnail in my earlier video, maybe y'all just missed it when I was talking about it, so I do want to show that here again. And you all asked me this question: Bryan, if we shoot internally with an internal card, can we get this same kind of test? And guys, I put this test here. One thing I even did is I even went so far as to try and put gaff tape over the eye sensor, so the LCD would think the eye was there and force it off. But if you are recording internally on the Canon R5, this hack will not work. You cannot get the LCD and the EVF to cut off if you're recording internally. This only works if you are sending out an HDMI signal and you have an external recorder. When you're doing that, at that point, the EVF and the LCD will cut off and you can get those extreme record times. But if you're recording internally, you cannot cut off the LCD and EVF. I've even tried going so far as taping over stuff, and with just the EVF on, as you can see in the test, it's still overheated. So this has to be done. It can only be done if you have an external recorder. I had a lot of people ask me about that. I wanted to definitively answer that and show this video one more time, big for you, so you would know. Okay, so one of the problems when you're shooting with this method is that you do lose that LCD and that EVF. And that's a problem because there's so much information on the LCD and EVF that I like to have access to when I'm shooting. I want to know where my focus points are. I just want to look at my ISO, my white balance, all things like that. I like knowing what they are. And a lot of you brought up a great point, which was this. You said, Bryan, can you use the Canon app when you're basically just doing out through the HDMI and basically be able to shut off your LCD and EVF that way and be able to still know what's going on with your camera? And I thought this was a fantastic idea, so I went there and did a test. And if you come here and look at this test, what you can see is I did the test and started going, and unfortunately, no matter what you do, if you're using the Canon app, you cannot cut off the LCD and EVF. There's something about that. When it was on, I did everything I could to cut it off. I couldn't. And unfortunately, no matter what you do, you cannot cut off the LCD and EVF if you are using the Canon app while you were recording with the Canon R5. Now, if you look here, I essentially had no card in the camera. I set the LCDs and EVF to go off at 1 minute and 3 minutes like I do for my normal HDMI out test. And for whatever reason, once I put on that signal and start controlling this camera remotely, the LCD and the EVF will not shut off. I tried everything I could to make that work. I couldn't. And as you can see here, I got about 34 minutes of recording in 4K HQ using the Canon app. So while that's a great idea in theory, and man, I wish it worked, hopefully there'll be a firmware update, maybe they can fix this. If you want to use this method and you try and use the Canon app, you will experience standard overheat times on the Canon R5. The Canon app will not allow it to extend it. If you want to have extended times, no Canon app, you've just got to go ahead and export your signal through the HDMI and let your EVF and LCD cut off. That means no internal recording and no Canon app. Okay, another thing that came out that I thought was a great question was, if you looked at my earlier test, I basically just filmed a plain wall right behind me, which I have right here. And some of you said, Bryan, that's not a really good test because you're not really putting the autofocus to the test. And so I decided to do the ultimate test for autofocus, and I basically reset up my test. But this time what I did is I just brought up a YouTube channel that was playing music videos. Music videos literally change frames. Probably you get about 3 to maybe 4 seconds on average before you get a new frame. I set my autofocus on face detect and just let this camera hunt for hours. And if you look here, when I did that, you can see the music videos. I have them blurred out just for copyright purposes. But no problem, 4K HQ, 24 frames a second. It just kept on going. I had no problem keeping it up, well over an hour. As you can see, there's lots and lots and lots of images there. The autofocus had no problem going. It kept going. Look at this, we're coming up here. We're crossing the 2-hour threshold, no problem. No overheating, what issues, and really the only thing that I ran into in this is I had not charged my V-mount battery all the way, and if you look at that, right at about 2 hours and 38 minutes, the battery ran out on me, and I had to stop recording. But 2 hours and 38 minutes, 4K HQ, 24 frames a second. This tells me that having a complex autofocus thing, if you're doing this, will not affect the overheating issue again. It pretty much reemphasizes for me The EVF and LCD are causing huge amounts of overheating issues here on the Canon R5. It has nothing to do with the Canon R5's autofocus system. And I just put through over 2.5 hours of filming music videos, and the camera was okay. It literally just ran out through the battery. So, good question. I hope that answers it for you. There's also one other major question that really came up a lot, and that was people did have some questions about 4K 60 frames a second on the Canon R5. Now for me, this is not something that makes sense for this kind of hack, because for this hack to work, you have to have the EVF and LCD off. So that means this is basically designed for being on a tripod. And for me, 60 frames a second is a classic B-roll type thing, which I'm moving around a lot. Doesn't make sense. But I did want to point out that this still works if for some reason you want to record huge amounts of footage at 60 frames a second in standard 4K. If you look here, it can do it. Now in this test, this was an earlier test I did. I had an internal battery. But usually my 4K 60 frames per second test, I could get 30 minutes or so. And when I let the LCD cut off, you can see it just kept on going, kept on going, kept on going. I let it run for an hour. My battery was about to die, so I cut off the test here at an hour, just so you can see. And the camera was fine and held out. So I do believe if you did try this test with 4K 60 frames a second, that you could probably get away with a lot of recording as well as this. It really seems to me, once again looking at this, that if you can get that EVF and that LCD to cut off, you're going to get extreme recording times on the Canon R5 through the HDMI up to an Atomos or any external recorder really that you have. One other question that a lot of you had is the AC. What was the ambient room temperature while I was doing that? A lot of you thought I was just cranking up the AC in here. And as you can see, I'm actually sweating right now. I actually do film this in an unclimate controlled garage I have down here in Georgia. It is July and June when I was doing these tests here in Georgia. So yes, it was very, very hot in here. I did measure the temperature. The average temperature would go between about 84 up to 85, around 80 degrees. It never got below 81 degrees for any of these tests. So yes, I did test these in above average room temperature, and the camera's always held up completely fine. And I think when you're gonna be using this for like interviews or concerts or performances, you're probably not gonna be recording these in like sauna-like conditions. You'll probably be in a little more climate controlled conditions. So that's where I think it can just kind of work. So anyway, so for my final verdict for all this, first of all, your questions were they were just awesome, man. They just really forced me to think about it. I thank you so much for all of your questions. They definitely kept me honest. And, you know, when it comes down to the final verdict, this hack, once again, putting it through another round of tests and actually now going out and trying this in the real world, this hack does work. Remember, there are a couple rules to it. One, you will never be able to internally record to do this hack. You have to have an external recorder. Number two, the Canon app will not save you. The Canon app, if you use it, will force that LCD and EVF coming on. And if you go back to point number one, if you have the LCD and EVF on, you will get standard overheat times on the Canon R5. And really, the third thing, if you're wondering it, complex autofocus has no problem with it whatsoever. Those of you that are really intrigued by the 8K option of this, I firmly believe when it comes to it, this 8K option will work exactly the same as a 4K HQ. We just need to wait for Canon to come out with that firmware update to let us get that 8K signal through the HDMI so we can actually fully test it. So it's a really, really cool hack. Just remember, guys, if for some reason you don't want to worry about overheating at all, standard 4K 24 frames a second on the Canon R5 will not give you any overheating issues whatsoever, and it really comes out really, really nice at the end of the day when you color grade it and get it. I've been really surprised at that. I really like that codec too. It's not as nice as the 4K HQ, but I'll be honest, it still looks great. So do not discard 4K 24 frames a second because it looks great and you don't have to worry about any of this, and you can use your back screen, so it is good to know. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for all your interest in this topic. I hope this follow-up video was helpful for you. And yeah, guys, look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, so go out there, keep on shooting. Yeah, and I'll talk to you soon.